everyone, to episode number 2 of Real Talk, where we discuss real issues with real voices. Basically, it is about breaking through the political spin, the corporate fluff, to bring you honest conversations about politics, business, and of course, our lives in society. I'm your host, Eddie Cara, and a little bit about myself. I'm a political strategist, entrepreneur, and an award-winning filmmaker. With me today, we have David Bruno, who's a policy contributor to the Canadian government, and we also have John Panatiere, who is the Quebec Liberal Party's regional president of the Youth Commission for Montreal South. Hey, y'all. So today's episode is going to be about the 2 debates that the QLP, the Quebec Liberal Party, has had regarding its leadership race. The first one was in French and solely about Quebec's economy. And then after the break, we'll talk about the second debate, which was the only English debate that the party had. The funny side of all this till now is that no one has actually been talking about the Quebec Liberal Party's leadership race till now. I mean, starting 2025, the focus has generally been on the federal election in Canada that we just had and U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, currently in Quebec, the Quebec Liberals are polling around 20%. In terms of the latest February Léger leadership poll of the Quebec Liberal Party, the former Minister of Heritage, Pablo Rodriguez, is the frontrunner, leading with 27%, Marc Bélanger at 9%, and Charles Milliard at 6%, while 47 remain undecided. So, without further ado, let's begin discussing the Quebec Liberal Party's leadership race, starting with the first debate about the economy. So, who did you think ended up shining during this debate? And who do you think won the debate? So, let's begin with David.
In terms of the economy, I had my own little ranking system here. I would have to say they all had their points. When it came to Bélanger in particular, I think he was the only one that actually had a focused vision. So that would be my best moment in that regard. The only problem I had with him was I'm trying to find the right way of saying it and not sounding too evil about it, but it seemed coming out flat. But apart from that, I mean the issue that's most important that came out the clearest on Bélanger's part of view was vision, for sure.
All right, thanks for that analysis, David. What about you, John? What are your thoughts?
So, I mean, just talking about Bélanger, I noticed his stage presence was very solemn, like not a lot of movement in the first debate, actually. I did think his policy was more of a Quebec nationalist perspective on a more centralized economy. That's what he stated himself, right? I think he has an appeal to maybe more of like the right side of the Quebec Liberal Party, but it was quite interesting in that sense. From my real takeaway in who the main winner is, I did appreciate I'm actually torn, actually. It's between, I think, Blackburn and Bélanger, actually, for who I think, and they're very diametrically opposed on how they view the economy. I think Blackburn, his takeaway was for more of a free enterprise form of economy, and I think that's decentralized, and I think would see some results. But as part of like a clearer vision, I think Bélanger was able to succinctly state his vision and convey that to the audience, in my opinion.
I'm going to chime in on that one. I had in regard to that, I think John and I are going to agree. I think Blackburn actually came out on top. I have a scorecard, and I was trying to do it as impartial as I could, and he got the most points on my card. My favorite part about Blackburn in that regard was he clearly came out and identified the lowest lying fruit that you can fix immediately, and that caught my attention right away. And the one thing that stood out was, how are we going to fix the food shortages or the the cost of living in that regard. And the easiest one is was something that they've done in France is just start with the waste. The grocery stores are getting rid of so much stuff, and even France has a law that says you're not allowed to throw away produce. So that to me is the lowest lying fruit. We can fix it almost immediately. We can stock up our food banks. The other thing that stood out with Blackburn that was just right spot on was the focus that we're going to make now on investment in the military. Quebec already has a very well-renowned aerospace industry, and having that investment from the federal government is a no-brainer, and it's poised to go. So, in that regard, in the French debate, I think he came out on top. He was very clear on those points, and I had, go figure, between Bélanger and Millard as the second people in that debate. So it would be the first would be Blackburn, second Millard and Bélanger together. They're
Okay, so let me just rewind a little bit. So one of the main things that I do teach clients who are candidates in a race, and yes, I've been a former federal nomination candidate as well. They're preparing for a debate, is what I call the AARP. And no, it's not what you're thinking with the American context. So it stands for the following: argue, attack, respond, and then presence. Okay, so two of you already discussed the presence portion. Those who want a much more concrete and much more lengthy analysis, you can check my LinkedIn articles regarding each debate. I'll have a link in the video description as well. So whenever it is about TV debates or video debates, presence really becomes crucial, essential. Because body language often communicates much more than words. And the prime example that she actually does give herself as well is at the 2016 U.S. presidential town hall, the second debate between Hillary Clinton, who is the Democratic nominee, and then the Republican nominee, Donald Trump. If you put the entire debate on mute, presence really does show, and you saw that not only Donald Trump seemed much more like to be dominating and domineering, but also literally stalking her around the stage, prancing everywhere. But whenever we're talking about the presence portion, that's what we're referring to. If you mute, who do you think had the most presence visually? But I still didn't answer the main question. I actually very shortly said there was no clear debate during this one. Because in my view, a debate needs to have in the responses of the candidates all those four portions, perhaps three, that are convincingly met. But I found that it was more like candidates were treating this as a question and answer period, as if this was a one-on-one interview on a podcast or something. Okay? The other thing that I noticed, especially with the ones you mentioned, as well as the frontrunner Pablo Rodriguez, is rather than actually focusing on, okay, here's what my position is, I answered your question about what my economic policy is, blah, 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 what we ought to do. And you could have taken like the 20 seconds from the 60-second response to address what the weakness of the frontrunner perhaps is in terms of, whether it's track record, competence, policy difference, blah, blah, blah. But nobody seemed to even realize this, and nobody even tried to attack Pablo Rodriguez, who is the front runner. And may I add that he literally just received two new endorsements, Mara Risky, who are married, of course, Mara Risky and Greg Kelly as MNAs, which makes the total number of caucus MNAs to 10 who are supporting him. Okay? So I don't think, in my view, there was a winner at all, because the style of responding, maybe I'm too strict, call me crazy, but that's the way I am. But if this was us grading in terms of who answered questions best, that would be a different scenario. I think it would be a tie between Carl Blackburn, Pablo Rodriguez, and Charles Milliard, in my view. But then again, that's why I also said there is no clear winner in terms of this first debate about the economy. Do you have anything else you wanted to add before I go on to favorite moments?
I will say Roy had some moments in the first French debates trying to
Mm.
poke towards Rodriguez's platform. I think out of all the candidates on stage in the first debate, he was really trying to make himself stand out in attacking Rodriguez's platform. He did invoke critiquing at least Rodriguez's platform, at least once from my recollection. And in the first debate, I did, and this will be my comments I'll have towards even the second debate in English. But in terms of stage presence, if we want to go back real quick, I think in terms of who was most present and most active and getting involvement of the crowd, I would have to give that to Rodriguez, just merely on how warm he is on stage and how he walks around. But what does that look like in terms of being a good leader? Up for debate. That's not going to be the only thing that gets him to the victory point across the finishing line. But
Okay.
just leave
Thanks,
that there.
John. Just on the point of who had the most presence, in your opinion, during this entire debate, David.
Definitely going to give my hat to Miyao. If you turned off
I
the
agree.
sound and his motions and his looking and where he's going, the facial demeanor, he looks a lot like Rob Canoe from the premier of Manitoba. He's pleasant to look at, and it almost doesn't matter what he. Well, I'm not saying that he's attractive. I'm saying his demeanor is actually very inviting. You're looking at him. You may not even be listening to what he's saying, but he's inviting you to listen.
So, in terms of presence, I have to wholeheartedly agree. It did help that he was at the center of the five candidates. So I jokingly wrote in my article, could he be the incoming mediator in chief? You know what I mean? Compromise, working in between everybody, just to try to unite them. But all kidding aside, it really did help. He was much more prepared to be on TV, right? If you notice, during both debates, Charles Milliard, Carl Blackburn, and Pablo Rodriguez, and almost Marc Bélanger as well, they were trying too quickly to fit in their responses in the 60-second time frame. So what you often noticed, maybe this is not particularly in the presence portion, but it's relevant, it was as if they were playing the audio clip in fast forward, like at 1.5 or 2.0 speed level. So oftentimes what helped Charles Milliard is the way he was conveying the message in terms of articulating clearly what he's saying, taking the right beats, the pauses. That's what really matters in comparison to the other candidates, not just rushing through everything.
Oh, I'd agree. I'd agree with his demeanor, but in terms of the clarity on what he's saying, I'd have to take a point away on that one.
Okay, so let's talk about who would you rather have a beer with? And with that question, it's always a question that's asked. So it's a very comical question that was started ever since the 2000 U.S. election because of George W. Bush, and a little bit in the 1992 U.S. election with Bill Clinton being the favorite as he had a comeback moment after the after the South Hampshire and Nevada caucus primaries, when he played jazz on late night. And that's when he started being the front runner, which was Hillary's idea, supposedly. So at this point, I'm going to say it's very difficult to find someone I'd like to have a beer with. But if in terms of who's the most relatable and human in terms of a personality. Now, I also said in my analysis, I did not see anyone's personality exude, throughout this debate. I guess I had two favorite moments, though, in which that could have happened. So number one is in terms of relatability. I would give this, it was only one moment, but it's still Pablo Rodriguez, this moment where he seemed to know what the regular Quebecer is going through when he talked about numbers in terms of average cost of groceries. He mentioned it's $325. I mean, the average is, according to the latest study, 300, which I'm completely fine with. He mentioned the price of cereal boxes, transportation costs, and the average rent in Quebec per month is $1,200. and he described these burdens of Quebec families as being enormous. So that was my number one favorite moment. The second one is probably much more on a comedic side. And frankly, the only funny moment, which was a little shocking, I was looking for others, I didn't find any in this debate. So it was when Charles Milliard actually jokingly, by touching Pablo Rodriguez's shoulder, he said in French, "I'm glad you're here, Pablo, because you're going to send me a check." There have been quite a few in Ottawa recently, and that's why I'm saying it. So, that was basically the way. So you were talking about demeanor, just to finish my point. It was very clear that the two candidates that really tried to segment themselves as anti-politicians or anti-establishment were Mario Roy, the long shot candidate, and Charles Milliard. Charles Milliard especially constantly phrased almost every single one of his responses by, "Politicians often say this and do this. I want to do this." So and one thing I found particularly that I wanted to advise his team, if they're watching this or reading, is you need to be much more conservative with your speaking time whenever you're debating, especially with 60 seconds. So he often, during the first debate, and let me not start about the second, he started saying, "I agree with Mario on this, I agree with this." So it's not necessary to always start off like that, and what politicians often do, and then give your answer. Just use the anti-establishment tone without always having to mention, because unless you're trying to insinuate that the other candidates are establishment and you're not.
I'm going to counter that one.
Sure. So, but don't forget, what was your favorite moment as well?
Of the French debate.
I hope so. Yeah.
The first debate. Okay, John, you go ahead first.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sure.
You seem so eager.
No, I wanted to counter your point, but I'll get to that in a minute. John,
well, yeah, go ahead. It's your floor. You have the
floor. I just wanted to say that Milliard was in continuation of what you're saying before we go into where our best was. I didn't find him very clear in his what he was trying to say on policy. I know he was pleasant to look at and to listen to, but I'm still not clear on what the policy is. But a few things he was and a few things he wasn't. So if you're trying to be not very politician-y, you might want to try some black and white answers, is what people are really looking for. Even though that may not be the right thing to do, but it is what people are looking for. John, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just add slightly a bit to that. I think within a party's leadership race, there's always going to be some level of being extremely cordial, right? There's not going to be that much aggressiveness because at the end of the day, they're all on the same team and hopefully we're all working towards the same goal within the Quebec Liberal Party, right? So we'll see how this develops towards the next couple of scheduled debates, but we'll see if they take notice or if they change up the strategy, but it'll be interesting for sure, to say the least. But the first two debates, if we want to just keep it to what we've seen, there is a lot of sort of stepping on what the other person has said as to build it up. So what that really translates to the voter, who knows at this moment. Still a bit early, but there is that sort of friendliness still.
So those were the favorite moments for both of you. What about the worst moment in the debate, or worst moments for a particular candidate? It could also be you meaning to say that this person performed the worst, perhaps. So what say you, John? Let's begin with you this time around.
Sure. So I think, without necessarily attacking Roy on his character, I think he's single-mindedly, if I come to think of the single worst candidate in his performance, I think it would have to be Roy. I don't think he necessarily convinced me on anything in particular. He just wanted to, from what I understood and what I've grasped, is a lot of puffing up his chest to say, hey, I'm not like everyone else on this stage. It was what the message that he conveyed to me was saying, hey, let me fight for you, believe in me. But I'm not sure how convincing that was, because he is quite young and a new face in the party. And I don't think he has the resume to really be as convincing as I would like to be in terms of a candidate. So that's how I'll wrap my thoughts on this.
Okay, so can I just answer the question? Because I know David's going to counter my point anyways. So, fair is fair. So I think the moment in the debate, it's not necessarily a catastrophe, but I guess in terms of the notion of economic liberalism, almost to the point of libertarianism. So this is why you got to know who your target audience is when you're running for leadership. And the Quebec Liberal Party, is full of very different ideologies, right? But typically with the economy, it's pretty, consistent. Okay, and at one point he started talking about out of nowhere he segued in the cost of living topic with Hydro-Quebec, and then he started talking about the need to protect Hydro-Quebec by making sure they stay a monopoly so that they keep prices down. I don't know on what planet this guy's coming from. But Mario, so typically you don't need to be an economics major or graduate to know this. When there is a monopoly or monopolistic behavior, that person can set the price however high he or she wants.
At whatever level, exactly.
Yeah, because you have no pricing pressures because of lack of competition. So that's why an oligopolistic industry is much more preferred, or much more competition further from that. So he kept saying that we need to keep costs low. Let me give you an example. Right now, literally in the month of April, per kilowatt per hour, Hydro-Quebec raised to $0.069 from the original $0.066. It's not much, I get it, but if you calculate it times 100 or to 1,000, 2,000 kilowatts per hour per month, that's a lot. And the reason they're increasing, as the president of Hydro-Quebec, Michel, said, is because of these projects that they want to start. We still don't know when, but it's supposed to be 2045, supposedly. So that to me was the worst moment for that debate.
In that regard specifically, we've been hearing that our levels in Quebec are at this level ever since I moved to Quebec in 2004. It's been the same argument ever since. So I'm just think that's just a talking point they use, but it's an absolute nonsense.
So what was your worst moment, David, of the debate?
So the worst moment, okay, so to your point where you're saying, know your audience. Okay, so he is talking to, they are all talking to an audience of Liberal members. Okay, so why attack the CAC constantly? We're not trying to convince other voters that they should be voting for them. We're already preaching to the choir. So I found that Rodriguez, his go-to in almost every argument was to attack the CAC. Well,
it was strategic.
I understand that, but again, your audience is Liberals. So the Liberals are already attacking the CAC. So why bring it up all the time?
I'll tell you why. Because it's tactically the most sound thing to do if you're in first or second place in a race, because you want to demonstrate that you're the candidate that will actually attack the current government. And that's the strategy behind it. Is it presumptuous for him to do it at every single point? Yeah, right? But I think he can. And he kept on doing it. I think more so during the first debate rather than the second he did that, because he was at very few points put a little bit on the defensive, or at least they tried to put him on the defensive.
In my opinion, it's a strategy that could backfire, because then it looks like you're just angry and you don't have policies of your own.
True that. And you'll notice that he talks about his policy a little bit more during the second debate, by the way, even though it's not much policy specifications. I think in both debates, to be fair, the understanding of the root of the issue as well as what the solution ought to be was much more explained in both debates, and I'm being completely fair here, by Charles Milliard, which is a surprise because he's not a politician. And I guess during the second debate, a little bit in the second place for that point that I was making would be Carl Blackburn, right? But do you have any final words for the first debate before we veer off the second debate?
I mean, I'll just wrap my thoughts collectively on the first debate. I think if we compare it to the second, I think the first debate covered a little bit more ground in terms of substance, but we'll see how that plays out in the upcoming debates for sure. But I thought it was fine. It was a welcoming event in Laval. So, it was cool, and I'm optimistic to see what the Liberal Party has to say moving forward.
Okay, and David, we've got 30 more seconds.
30 seconds. Well, in general, I liked it. I liked it. I liked them. I was convinced by almost all of them. The only problem I had was Bélanger's message fell flat, and he had a lot of good points. I gave him good points to that, but it just didn't come out.
Okay, so we're going to finish off this segment of the episode about debate one. And after this break, we'll be back and discuss debate number two, the only one that was in English, right after this. Okay, so we're back from our break, and now we're going to talk about the only English debate that the Quebec Liberal Party had, which was on Sunday at Sainte-Anne-de-Bellevue and Gregory Kelly's writing. So it was the only one that was in English. I have to specify that because it was one of the major complaints during this campaign early this year. So because John is limited in time right now, so what was your favorite moment, the worst moment? Who was the winner? Who was the biggest loser, would you say? Go ahead, John, you have the floor.
I'll give the crown of this debate actually to Charles Milliard in the English debate. I feel out of all the candidates on stage, he was able to eloquently express all of his ideas in a succinct manner, I think, to the English-speaking audience. And I think he clearly stated the issues and the irony of the Quebec government in terms of wanting French to be promoted, but then cutting French education. He succinctly called them out, saying it was politically schizophrenic, and I think him speaking that truth to the people showed not only of his character, but that he was willing to fight for that. And as a member of the anglophone community, I thought that was quite refreshing to hear and not see really the politician-y responses around 96, danced around on stage. So I give him that as the crowning moment. I don't think there was anything that was particularly the worst moment that I would highlight saying, oh, this was quite embarrassing. But I do think the conversation around the Quebec Constitution was unfortunate because I don't think it's in the political capital of what's happening in the context of Quebec politics to really invest that time discussing that issue in particular because there's so many other concerns that the average Quebec voter is more concerned about than a Quebec Constitution. I think for that being, it should be on the back burner to maybe be addressed in a couple of years from now for sure. But, people are worried about the price of housing, the price of getting their groceries done. Education's a concern for a lot of people. And, there's a lot more pressing factors. So for the only English debate, I feel like that was maybe slightly waste of time, if I'll round off my ideas on that.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back as John has to leave us. So stay tuned.
And thank you for having me on.
Okay, so we are back because John had to leave. So we're going to continue with David on who do you think was the winner of this English debate?
So in my wisdom of scorecarding, as I like to do with any debate, I found points were given on equally to Roy and Millard. I found that Roy was an excellent debater. His English may not have come out perfectly, but who cares? It doesn't make a difference. His point was made. He was able to, with composure, attack some policies of which I found really interesting is he attacked some policies of Rodriguez while he was in the federal government. I thought it was brilliant because there was a moment where he was talking about what he had done while he was minister, and specifically on 96. And as 96 came out, when the question was asked here at the debate, what would you do? And he said, well, there's certain, he was wonderfully stated. Rodriguez said it was, certain parts were completely absurd, but then Waugh came back and said, well, that's not what you said when it came out. So I found that was witty, and it was to the point. It was a good thing to have in a healthy debate, and I appreciated that. In regard to Mial, that had equal score, I mean, he said the right things. There are still, again, a few things that were not entirely clear, but other things were. So I think his demeanor and his way that he presented himself and the way that he presents himself to Anglophones particularly, which is exactly what this debate was all about, held the day. And I would give him and Waugh equal points in that regard.
Okay, so I think, first of all, in terms of what I said with my analysis, and I'll always use this framework for all my debate analyses, is the AARP acronym. So in terms of presence, I think Mario Roy was very, call it chance or coincidentally or luckily for him, placed at the center of the stage. But in terms of presence, the ones who had presence, I would say it's quite a toss-up because they all stood their ground pretty well. I think the one that really segmented himself as the statesman-in-chief role was Carl Blackburn.
Okay.
Almost as if he's running to be the diplomat, right?
Okay.
He was very poised, diplomatic in his answers. He knew about policy. He's you can consider him to be somewhat establishment character, right? As a candidate, so he was a past MNA at the end of the day of Roberval, so I mean it wouldn't be a far-fetched thing to claim. But in terms of the debate approach of this debate, I think it was much more like definitely an improvement from debate number one.
Really?
Yes, everyone has had a challenge with the English language, but I think people knew that, at least a few of the people on the stage knew that the stakes were higher with the Anglophone community, because ever since 2022, the Quebec Liberal Party has lost a good chunk of the Anglophone community to Quebec Solidaire, right? So in terms of answering questions by giving out human stories as examples, knowing what the problems and the solutions were, and in terms of zingers, Charles Méliard won the day, right?
Okay.
With great zingers. But as I said, it is a debate, so I have to gauge accordingly.
Right.
But if it is the only one person who actually came to debate by using the framework that I introduced, argue, attack, and responding, and not just responding to questions, the only one actually was Mario Roy, right? And the remainder of the candidates really had missed a lot of opportunities, almost to the point where I was getting mad. And I was live present as an audience member at the debate.
Yeah.
So I was like, why? This was an easy thing to attack on or address or correct, or disagree on. One of the major things that annoyed me the most is how often everyone had to mention how they agreed with this, agreed with that person, agree.
Oh, I didn't mind that, though.
Well, it's normal in a party, but enough is enough of agreeing. Like Carl did not have to say with every single sentence, I agree with this, I agree with that, It became a little bit too much.
Okay.
In terms of missed opportunities, a lot of missed opportunities, especially against the current frontrunner Pablo Rodriguez. I guess the one who came to debate is Mario Roy. Sure, his English was weaker than the other candidates, but I still did not mind. I understood what he was trying to convey.
Yep.
But is he going to gauge enough momentum, especially from the agricultural sector, from the regions, to propel him from fifth place to X, third or fourth, because it is a preferential ballot.
I was thinking about that as well, and what I did like in particular when you're mentioning Roy was the courage. I mean, you can tell that he's inexperienced, but I shelved it. You can tell. I was actually listening to what he had to say.
Yeah, and majority I completely empathized with. Now, one of the things that was, and I'll get to the debate topics in a bit. One of the things, so I was talking about segmentation. So Carl Blackburn, statesman in chief among the people on the stage. Pablo consistently attacked François Legault again, a lot less than the first debate, but he still did. He wanted to segment himself as the guy to beat François Legault and Plamondon.
Right.
By the way, nobody attacked Plamondon other than Mario Roy. So Mario Roy segmented himself as the long shot candidate who's not afraid to take heads on in terms of.
He was the clearest on that one. You're right.
Yeah. Marc Bélanger, his speaking style is quite eloquent, okay? He is a lawyer by trade. He did talk about, I think it was a promoting stunt, his upcoming book, or his latest book that he released,
yes,
in which he has an entire chapter apparently on Bill 96.
Yes.
But he kept on repeating, and this is a tactic that people have to do in speeches and also debates. If they want to segment themselves as X, right, you need to repeat it constantly. It's what Donald Trump actually, as a presidential candidate, did often very, very well.
Okay.
One word or a few words. I'm not talking about the name calling of people. I'm talking about like completely trying to persuade folks, no matter if it's factual or not. So it was very evident that Marc Bélanger wanted to imprint in our heads that he wants to raise public revenues through our natural resources. I heard that at least 5 times throughout the debate. I was like, okay, because he was trying to make the point that we need to at least stop being in deficit and at least try to break even or be profitable.
Yeah.
Right? So he said we need to. In my head, the first time or the second time I heard that, I was like, wait a minute, wasn't that line somebody else's infamous project? Projet du Nord.
Right. That was many years ago. Yeah, and it worked very well.
Jean Charest.
Jean Charest. With Charest actually did open up northern projects. What happened later was after he had left politics, it went the wayside, absolutely. But there was no political will after that. But that wasn't his fault, though. He'd actually completed his portion of the work. And I have to agree with you on Bélanger 100%. I heard the word resources over and over again. And I particularly liked when he came out and was the only one to say that knowledge is also a resource, which is something that I completely agree with.
He talked about AI as well, actually.
And AI, yes. But what I liked the most about in regard to this debate was for the Anglophone community saying, you're not a threat, you're a resource. And that that stuck out in my head.
So, because in the past, Bélanger has said we shouldn't, we're not trying to be fearful of English language, and I'm translating here, but we want to protect the French language.
Right.
So that's why he's perceived to be, especially by Anglophones, quite a nationalistic candidate.
Okay.
So I forgot to also talk about Charles Milliard. If it was to segment himself, he didn't talk about politicians this time around, but he focused more on knowledge, issue familiarity, and the solution portion of the problems, right? He had the better zingers of the night. I agree with that. And one of the things that I had a personal problem with most of the questions, how they were formulated. And I don't know if it's the debate moderator herself who created all these questions, really lengthy questions that ended up being too broad most of the time. Like, you can't give candidates 60 seconds to just answer the question about what should we do about our supply chain, or what is your stance on the Quebec Constitution. since we're on the topic, one of the debate topics was about the Quebec Constitution, ironically enough, which I was like, okay, I've always been like personally against the party position because at the last November's Congress, it got passed by the party. I did not vote for it, and I'll get to my reasons in a bit, but if I were to conduct an informal poll right now, or a professional one, which I do, it would not even rank one of the 15 top issues of Quebecers, whether or not we need a Quebec Constitution. So this type of language, in my view, it makes us seem. But one thing I forgot to mention to our audience is that I was also quite involved with the Quebec Liberal Party, especially in 2022 and 3. And with a leadership race, I'm quite Swiss, so I don't have a stake. So folks should not think I'm on the team of somebody particularly. I'm leaning towards one or two people, though. You'll find out that in later episodes, hopefully. So, but the Quebec Constitution
stay
question,
tuned.
right? So the Quebec Constitution question, I'm like, okay, who the hell in Quebec is actually thinking, this Quebec Constitution, we must pass it because it's going to improve how much money I take in to feed my family?
Oh yeah,
Or
no,
take care of my senior parents, or improve education or
for
health
sure.
care, transportation. Nobody is actually suggesting this is one of the primary things we need to do to combat the affordability crises that are going on right now. And may I add, we already have a Quebec Charter of Human Rights.
Oh yeah, we have
Canadian
everything
Charter
we
of
need
Human
in
Rights.
Quebec already.
We have so it was ratified in 1982 by Trudeau Senior as the Prime Minister. We have the Quebec Civil Code that we use as a law. What more do we need? We are the only province that actually follows civil law, right, in terms of the domain of law. So that's why we have a civil code,
Exactly.
particularly with intra-personal issues like contracts or faults and tort liability, etc. So I was quite baffled by one of the first questions of the debate being this. And the candidates were like, okay, well, they're either answering I'm for it, or it's not something that important, so we'll review it. You know?
Yeah. I'm going to answer that one a little bit, but since the question was raised, my favorite person who answered it correctly was Wa. Yeah, sure. I mean, if it's on the table, we're going to do it. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to sign. I would sign it, and I would sign it in conjunction with the Canadian Constitution of Rights and Freedoms, or with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That was the right thing to say from a Liberal Party point of view, in my opinion, as a Federalist Party. The 100%. It's just, I mean, the way I think about it is they're going to coalesce all of those different bills that were already out there doing exactly what they want to do with this new constitution, and it won't change anything. So from Hua's point of view, to make it relevant is to say, yeah, I'll sign it, absolutely, as long as we have a condition that it's within the context of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and I'm going to sign that too. That was the right thing to say.
Well, in fairness, he didn't exactly just say that. What else did he do in his answer portion? He actually took the opportunity to attack Pablo Rodriguez, who just gave a very nuanced non-answer, if I'm being honest with you, by saying it'll be reviewed, whatever. I would have preferred someone sounding less like a politician, by the way, in their response technique, and saying something that I said, like, who the hell is caring about this issue? It's not improving my life in any way, shape, or form, right? And if, by the way, the Quebec Charter is a quasi-constitutional document because, you know, it's just it's a portion of the Canadian Charter. It does take precedence in Quebec, regardless. And if there's any human rights violations, it can also go to the Human Rights Commission as well, and the tribunal afterwards. So
Right.
all these, but he took the opportunity to attack Pablo Rodriguez by saying, members voted for this, why don't you want to get it done and be for it? So he took that opportunity to attack him on that. I found the way he attacked, I liked. I was like, yes, finally someone took an opportunity to debate, to argue and attack. But I think he should have made it a little more specific to day-to-day issues, because that's what Quebec Liberals want to know, and related to us, rather than members want it, why not do it? So it's a little bit like, because a lot of party leaders do things that the members then vote for, let's be honest, right? In terms of platform of a party. So what did you think about that at a moment in which he took the moment to attack Pablo Rodriguez?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I like you said. I mean, the first thing that he said about it was, it makes no difference. It's not a priority. Who cares, basically? I'm not sure if that's the right thing to say. I know that there are some Quebecers that would like to see something a little bit more, I don't know, put together. Quebec's laws, in terms of the Bill of Rights and the Quebec Charter, they seem fragmented. I secretly I don't know if the other parties are going to get involved, but the one thing that does bother me is the preemptive talking about using the notwithstanding clause as a weapon against laws that Quebecers or the government wants to use. Now, if we're going to write a constitution, maybe we should put in this constitution, hey, that's absurd. Maybe we shouldn't have something that takes rights away from Quebecers. I mean, I've been someone who's always said a Quebecer is a Quebecer is a Quebecer. This outstanding absurdity of a new Quebecer, old Quebecer, Canadian Quebecer, an Ontarian Quebecer.
Pablo Rodriguez actually used that line, and similarly paraphrased by Charles Milliard. FYI. A Quebecer is a Quebecer, Let's move on to some of the things that occurred, which were, my least favorite moments. It was much more jovial, this debate. There were a lot more laughs, especially about the Spanish language, the fact that Rodriguez actually speaks Spanish. So he kind of complimented Charles Milliard by saying, if you need someone to translate or speak in Spanish, I'm here. So you don't have to worry about that. He said something along those lines, which I laughed. A lot of missed opportunities. My biggest, I guess, beef would be, there's a clear front runner. Obviously, the February poll is probably outdated by now, but it still is significant from 27 to 9%. There's quite a gap, right? 18 points. So I would have still done what Mario Roy did, and Mario Roy, was going for the attacks, but sometimes he was out of time and often cut by the moderator. That's one thing I noticed as well. Another moment was Marc Bélanger, when, I don't know how to categorize that, whether it's one of my favorite moments or least favorite moments, but he talked about dealing with people internationally, and then he said something along the lines of, I've dealt with many people and negotiated with many people internationally and led them as well in terms of negotiations. And let me tell you, Pablo, you're definitely not one of them. And it was meant, I think it wasn't worded well, but I understood. I was like, ooh. And then in the room, you felt like somebody stuck a pin or something somewhere. So it, depending on what type of viewer you are, you either liked it or you did not. But I think the way he did it was a little bit in need of polishing, but I understood what he was trying to say. I'm not sure how to categorize this, either if it was one of the favorite or least favorite moments, but it was one of the key moments in which I saw an opportunity being taken to argue and attack by Mario Roy. So it was first about the Quebec Constitution, which we just spoke about. And then the other opportunities where he was trying to attack Pablo. And it was in response to one of the most outright lies, in my opinion, when Pablo outright took primary credit for ratifying our Canadian, U.S., Mexican trade deal, which used to be called NAFTA, and now it's USMCA. He literally said he was at the forefront of it, and he alone dealt with Trump and got it done, even though he was
who got it done. I was thinking about
Minister of Transport at the time.
Right.
I don't know what he was saying.
I think what he was referring to as the Quebec lieutenant when it came specifically to the supply management. Thank you. Where he's clearly the Quebec lieutenant for the Liberal Party and for the government in Quebec at that time. And I think it was a stretch. It's maybe true, may not. I think that's why he went in that direction, and he went for it.
So yeah, it was the biggest lie, though. What I just talked about, it was Chrystia Freeland, and not a single person really attacked him on that front, because he kept on going on in his responses by how he's dealt with Donald Trump, and he's not easy to deal with. He literally said that, by the way. So no one actually attacked him to correct that lie. Everybody just dozed off of it. And rather they focused on another point of attack, which in Marc Bélanger's case was, I think, the lack of personality and character to be able to deal with negotiations. And then by Mario Roy, it was shambles, basically, what you did, if you're taking credit for it and you did it, you know? So, which kind of echoed Trump's words, to be honest. One thing that was, another debate topic was, interestingly enough, Bill 96 and education, okay? Educational institutions, rather. So this extra tax on non-Francophone institutions that the local government put in place. And one thing that I noticed on stage was the complete absence of a former leadership candidate, Denis Coderre. And he was the only candidate who vehemently opposed Bill 96 and even wanted to abolish it completely. And he kept it super simple by saying that. He didn't go in details. He didn't give BS answers of a typical politician.
Yep.
And on the stage, it seemed like everybody was for some parts of it, which Pablo said. And
Yes.
then others just didn't have a position at all. So they said something along the lines, like Carl Blackburn, Marc Bélanger, and Charles Milliard. They said along the lines, we need to review it. As if, like, for the last 6-7 years, we haven't had time to review this law. You know. So I found that particularly odd to answer.
If I understood correctly, I think Roy was the only one that said, I'm getting rid of it, flat out. That was the right thing to say for an Anglophone audience, that's for sure.
Yeah, so the party has always been against Bill 96, by the way. The former leader, Dominique Anglade, even struggled how to answer that question, though, which I've always been of the opinion it should be very simple to answer. You know, just don't fall in the trap set by the opposition, the other parties who are running. At the risk of losing the Francophone vote. So just say you're not for it, but what you are for is protecting the French language and culture, period. Simple. One of the interesting things throughout this debate was how Pablo was literally present for all of these Quebec issues as a cabinet minister. So he was transport minister, and he was also the minister of heritage. So that when I say missed opportunities to argue and attack, literally the focus should have been on Pablo. He was present during the trade deal, as he claimed, supposedly at the forefront of the trade deal ratifications. He was there during Bill 96. He was present during the educational tuition increases and special taxes imposed. He was literally there when the battery plans did not go through, when the French culture started diminishing, and so on and so forth, and supply chain as well. And he was the Quebec lieutenant too, let's not forget. So no one actually attacked him on that. And then he literally claimed that he has dealt with them, and he literally said, I spoke against it. And if I were one of the leadership candidates, I would have said, words are not the same as actions, and people want to see actions more than words. Sure, you said something along the lines of that's not right, but what did you actually do when you were in a position of power, which he was?
On that point, I'm surprised he didn't defend his record more.
Yeah. He was doing a piss poor job pivoting too, you're right.
He was in that position for that long. Roy was very poignant in saying, what did you do? I mean, that came up more than once. It was very poignant, and for good or bad, Rodriguez should have had more to say on that regard. We were forming an appeal. We're always defending the charter. He said nothing. I mean, if you want to talk about
I
lost
don't know
opportunities,
why.
I think he lost it there.
Yeah, so that's why I didn't say he was the best debate performer, right? It's because even when you're expected to be on the defensive as a front runner, and he should have practiced, I guess, prepped better. I don't know who the fault lies with, but at least have good defensive points and not just say, "I spoke against it." So simply, but if I had to like paraphrase it and sum it up in one sentence, he mainly tried saying that.
It looked like he was very, very confident in his experience in speaking in the House, and it sounded like that. It, if I didn't know any better, it looked like he was unprepared, which I know he was, but it came out. I don't want to say the word flat, but I mean I know he could do better. Let me put it to you that way. So it was for the front runner. There should have been way more ammunition in his gun.
Hmm. And this is the time during the debates where, starting from the second till the end, you need to actually differentiate yourselves as candidates, because you can't all be in unanimity, homogeneous. Like, I agree, I agree, I agree. Okay, we get it. You agree. Try to differentiate yourself on why we should vote for you. Rather than why we shouldn't vote for you. That's the irony and all that too.
Again, that didn't bother me all that much, though. What I really was looking for, not even necessarily what makes them different amongst each other. Uh, Talk about what makes the Liberal Party different from all the other parties.
Yes, I found that was lacking.
What exactly is sticking out that makes you favorable to? Don't worry about the anglophones, but what makes you completely different? And I didn't get that in anything 100%. There were a few notes that I made that did stick out, but I mean the when we're talking about the healthcare and how it's completely broken, and it's not completely broken. It's just overwhelmed. So having when they were talking about having the public sector help out
Being helped by the private sector.
by the private sector, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are points to be said about it. I mean, if you want to demonize it, you can say, well, there's a two-tier system. Well, not really. I mean, if you look at Ontario, for example, and I'll give you an example of the blood draw clinic, Life Labs. Life Labs does their work; they do it very well, but they build a province, and they do it better than the hospital does. Well, that's what we have in Quebec. Only they're not billing the province directly. It goes around another different circle, but they're doing a more efficient job. Now, defending that, they didn't really do a good enough job with that because I think there's a fear of saying private. And once you say that, they'll automatically think of two-tier system.
So absolutely right, and I found there's more debates obviously that are shaping up. The next one being in literally 2 days. Um, there needs to come a point where you need to go for the jugular a little more, and people are looking for not someone with policy familiarity, someone who has plans, right? But someone who's able to take on not just Plamondon, but also Legault, right? Because the Parti Québécois is right now at the helm of the polls and not François Legault. So I think in terms of the target focus for the attacks that Pablo Rodriguez focused on, it also needs to be much more, thrown towards the Plamondon camp a lot more. And I find that the leadership race, for whatever people thought, is the best timed, because it's at and it wasn't intentional at first, but it's at the most opportune moment. We just had a liberal super minority election result, and the momentum is on the liberal side. So this is the right time to have these debates and the race concluding next month. So I find that it's the most opportune time to rebuild the party. And I think one of the key things I've noticed throughout this debate is not a single one of the candidates said that they're proud liberals. And that's what we're looking for. Who's going to be captain, not just Captain Canada, but also Captain Liberal in Quebec, right? I still don't see someone who is a proud liberal. And I think starting from debate number 3 and onwards, you really need to focus on segmenting yourselves if you're the candidates as that. because it's going to increase people giving you first or second choice on the ranked ballots. Would you like to add anything, David, to that point?
Would I like to add anything? I think I think they're on the right track. There was no knockout punch if that's what we're looking for. They need to focus more on what makes them completely different. I'm still not convinced. I don't know what it is. I didn't hear it, and if I did, it just went in one ear and went out the other. So I'm not really sure what to say about that. Do they look good in terms of putting themselves together for the public? There has to be more refinement, I believe. I'm a little tossed up on who. I think anyone could win this. Almost anyone could win this. I know that Pablo's
Yeah.
out front and he's got the experience. He's been around. He's been around the mountain a few times. He knows what he's talking about, but I'm not entirely convinced yet that he could carry the day. I mean, with a ranked ballot, we all know that could change with it on a dime. So the other candidate, I mean, if you look at Roy, he has the most to lose, and so he came out swinging. He looked.
Actually, the least to lose.
I think there's still work to do.
Okay, so my bottom line, I guess, at the end of this analysis for debate number 2 is keep the swinging coming, and be much more proud to be liberal and your messaging strategies. That's my point. So that's all for today's episode of Real Talk. Once again, thanks, David. I'm glad to have had you. Until next time.